Good morning, guys. Or good day.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon. Добрый день. My name is Alex. I will moderate this cool discussion. The idea is you can ask any questions, hopefully related to PHP and programming, and these experts will give their opinions. So let's start. You should raise your hand. You can ask Russian, Ukrainian, or English. I will translate.
Or Dutch.
Or Dutch.
Swedish.
But I will not translate. Who will be the first?
Start asking questions.
Yeah, first question. Who of you consider yourself an expert? An expert. Exactly. we know experts.
These junior programmers will.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'll start. Pretty popular question, and not a new question, but anyway, in 2017, 2018 now, okay. What do you think, what is your opinion about asynchronous PHP, about parallelism in PHP? Does it make sense? What is the zone of usage of this? From your experience, should PHP still die only? Or, I mean, as it should work classically? So what's your opinion about that?
Yeah, I have a microphone. So, finally it works. It doesn't leak. So technically it's fine. And there are frameworks that are fine, such as the React PHP. It works. It's good for daemons. But I don't think that everything should be done in the asynchronous manner. Because while it gives you lots of the flexibility, it introduces new complexities. It's like the shared state. And the shared state means you have to code it like before, so it will die. So it will be reactive, and you will be able to scale it. Because if you have something in memory, if you cache it, you cannot scale it. So that's the problem. So I prefer the old traditional way when the PHP is dying, not to care much about how much memory I use, etc., etc. It's simpler. And it works well in teams where developers got used to the old way. That's fine.
It's a curious thing that, following on that, is that a lot more processing now goes to like service workers on Amazon Lambda, which is just pretty much the same thing that PHP does, right? It's a shared nothing architecture, which, I mean, because they're bigger companies are going into this, there must be some value into this in the first place. So I think, yeah, asynchronous works in some cases. I don't think PHP particularly is a very good language for it, although it can do it. But yeah, sorry, didn't catch your name actually. As Alex said, PHP strength, or there's always strength in having the simplicity of having this shared nothing architecture. And I think you should be looking at how can I make a lot of use out of this before figuring out, oh, I want to do asynchronous. Does that make sense?
I also think that, well, asynchronous with PHP, it works, and you can do it. And I think React PHP does a great way of pushing the boundaries of PHP and helping to, grow PHP as a language. I don't think, I mean, if you have a hammer, everything seems to be a nail. Is it the way you'd say it? Yeah. So I don't think that PHP should be used for every use case, even though you could. Yeah.
I would also like to follow up here. Sorry. What is the difference between like asynchronous and offloading work to a remote process compared to like threads? And I think you can do the answer for this.
Yeah, well, in theory, you can do everything we do in asynchronous programming. Nowadays, with what we do is stream switching and stream selection. You can do it with threads, but this is just more like an implementation detail. It's about keeping the CPU more busy. And it's just like another optimization step. But what is more interesting about the asynchronous architecture is that in order for it to be effective, it needs to be pulled through all the layers. So you need to have the dispatcher asynchronous. You need to have part of the business logic asynchronous. You need to have every external API asynchronous. You need to have the database interactions asynchronous. So it's not just like plug in one part and make it asynchronous, because everything else is going to be stuck and waiting anyway. So it is a much bigger effort than what it looks to make a completely asynchronous application. From a business value perspective, most applications I work with, the users are fine if it loads in under 5 seconds, okay? And this is enough. There is no need for going faster than that for a lot of applications. And if you need to go sub-millisecond, then you don't use PHP. You use Varnish, which loads a million requests in a minute if you want, which is a completely different thing. And uses threads. Keep it. Keep it. Right?
Okay.
Mine.
Thank you, guys.
I think we're really fun with PHP is now, and we're very happy with the last things that happened in PHP, and we finally have with PHP 7, I think a good language, and I actually don't think much about the new stuff that's coming. I'm very happy where we are now, and with the last improvements, we have a good, stable language to work with, and this is what I'm really satisfied with.
Yeah.
I'm replying and he's doing the selfies, yeah.
Thanks.
Hello, hello. Can you pay attention?
A new question.
What do you think? Can you see a value in a PHP going serverless?
Sorry, PHP going serverless? Sorry, I only caught the last bit.
Could you repeat?
Because it's regular for Node.js, like last example. Do you think that PHP should go this way also? I mean realization in some distinct functions that is not a solid couple of software.
Well, I'll try to introduce the question. So I do think serverless, we are talking about more an architecture than just the language we are using, of course. So you have your use cases for serverless, and usually you offload the work after your first entry point. So you have like your function, and then from there you offload to anywhere else. So you basically use queues, and then you start distributing the work. So you have a lot of handlers. So like you can use 20, 30 different technologies behind it. So PHP could be used for serverless, but I do think, for instance, the choice of Lambda for being Python and etc. are because those languages, first, they are available in every kind of Linux machine. So you bootstrap a Linux machine, you have Python 2, you have Python 3, 3.6, that's one term. And also the way you can interact with the language and the system, because with Python you can like talk a lot to Linux in a high level, different from what you do like with PHP, calling like shell exec, or having to use a lot of libraries to do this kind of stuff. So basically, I think you can choose languages which are going to give you more power than PHP. But you could go PHP, of course. I don't know if anyone has a different opinion on that, wanted to compliment.
Well, I think PHP is actually a better fit than Python and Node.js. Those languages were thought initially for doing opening sockets, doing network transmission. Node.js was thought as a server to run stuff. And PHP actually started from the same architectural patterns that are deployed on the Lambda systems. So if you start, I don't know, a Java system, a Java function on Lambda, you will have to start the JVM, and the JVM is not thought for this stuff. It will not optimize just in time what needs to be executed, because it's not supposed to run just one request and then die. It's not designed for that. So PHP is a relatively terrible language when it comes to handling request and response, actually. It does it well, yes, but it's really slow at it. But this shared nothing is a big win, and all the ecosystem has grown around it, which means that using a library from PHP that can then be deployed on Lambda is probably going to work better than a library in another language written for the same purpose, because that library may have been written for a long-running process. So we're talking obviously optimization semantics here, but there is really no big difference there. And personally, rather than deploying something that runs on Node.js, I would pick anything else, like really.
There is always a server behind serverless.
That's true.
Cool. Hello. There is also always a container on a server running on a serverless.
And a virtualizer.
And a virtualizer, a hypervisor, yeah. And a CPU and a data center. And Google. Yeah, someone else was going to ask.
I wanted. Yeah. So if I may, you guys were mentioning about functional programming, and that actually PHP, actually Marco did, has a future as functional programming. And you mentioned the problem about function autoloading, yeah? And I'm just curious, what are options of this implementation? About function autoloading, yeah.
Right, so there is a problem in the PHP language that prevents function autoloading from being viable, which is that PHP does first a lookup in the current namespace for a function call, and then does a second lookup in the global namespace for the same function, and this is problematic. And the second issue, which is probably minor, is that it's all case insensitive, which means that you can have the same problems that you have with classes right now. You use a class with a different casing, everything breaks. If we manage to get rid of this two-phase lookup, which is happening, by the way, if you use like doctrine coding standard, you can already like format all your libraries so that all the function lookups are absolute. If we manage to get rid of it from the language, which is unlikely, then it can be solved, and we can move forward with somebody's proposal to implement it, actually.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Functional?
No. Any comments on functional programming?
No.
Good question, though.
Hello. So I have two questions. Each of it is like small. So first question is, what is your favorite language? Maybe second after PHP, if PHP is the first. And next question is, what language do you propose for PHP developers to learn just to know PHP better? It may be like different languages, so. Yeah, programming language. For sure.
So what programming languages is your second favorite, and what programming language should you be learning to be better at PHP?
Yeah.
Oh, do you have any good answers?
Yes. You go first, you hold the mic.
I studied a lot of Java in university, so I would think Java is my second language. I'm not sure if that's my favorite one. I've been looking into Golang a bit, because I heard they do some amazing stuff on streams. And I also know a lot of famous, really old PHP developers, like senior PHP developers, that like reads a book about Go and then disappears from the PHP community. So it's quite. I'm kind of interested in what they found there. I would maybe steal Marco's answer here. I mean, if you want to understand programming better, you should choose something that's completely different from PHP. I mean, you shouldn't use Python. I mean, maybe go with Haskell or some weird-looking language. That's he nods silently. Yeah.
I think everybody should learn assembly as well. It's certainly not my second favorite language, though. But I think it gives a very good basic idea of what a computer actually does, and you don't see that by using a high level language like PHP or even C in most cases. C is probably my second favorite language, though.
I think you should try to learn JavaScript. Obvious, because if you know just any backend stuff, language or whatever, if you want to iterate faster, if you want to build product better, you need to become a full stack developer, and that will allow you bring faster, better product.
I don't have that much experience with other languages. I do, of course, JavaScript. I've done quite some Python stuff when I work with Raspberry Pis and little projects I do there. But I really like Python. But I also think that when I want to really try a new language, it should be something that's really different from PHP. And yeah, maybe I would try to go into Go or something like that. But maybe some other has here some experience.
So for me, I wouldn't say favorite language, but I did love Objective-C and Java. Yeah, with the memory allocation stuff before. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And in general, I think it's just good to look at other languages. So even if you don't, in my opinion, you don't really have to spend a lot of time with other languages, but just, you know, try to see how these languages work and what their different concepts are, and maybe get new ideas for your favorite programming language. Yeah.
So my second favorite is probably TypeScript. The good thing that the PHP is getting there with the type hints and the optional is question marks. And I really like it. So, but I think the eye-opening was a year when I was the Android developer. Not because of the language. Java is fine as a language. I was developing with the J2EE previously, but because of the concepts. In Android, everything is asynchronous. Totally asynchronous, so you have to think differently. And this paradigm shift is what was important, not the language.
Yeah, I'll go with something completely different. Try some Scheme. Anybody heard of that? Yeah. So it's a programming. It's a Lisp programming language. So you can actually write an evaluator for Scheme in 7 lines of Scheme, which is basically programming the programming language in 7 lines, which I think is fascinating. It's more about the mathematical concepts behind languages. And we didn't use them for many years because the von Neumann machine is how we generally work with, which is what assembly is all about. Pushing around pointers, moving around the stack, moving around and seeing where memory is and allocate it and so on. But what if computers were more oriented in evaluating mathematical models? So you can learn a lot from completely different approaches that introduce completely different ways of evaluating. You could have stacks, you could have lazy evaluation, eager evaluation. It pretty much messes with your brain how deep you can go in learning completely different ways of thinking about a computer program. And I think these languages give a lot of food for thought, not much food for actually for home when you want to actually bring back a pay. But they actually lead to interesting discussion, and you can get a lot from that just as a betterment of yourself.
Well, my second favorite language is PHP. I was waiting to make the joke. No, no, I do like to play around some other languages. I would say my favorite language is the one that I'm doing the Hello World. It's nice, but I do like a lot of TypeScript as well. I also try to mess a lot with ECMAScript, newest stuff, so 6, 7 is really cool. I see all those dynamic things happen, I'm like, oh my god, how do you handle all of that? The whole syntax, it's quite nice, and the async way of thinking as well. So I do agree a bit, if you work with web, if that's the thing you like to do, trying to be a bit more full stack, also change how you think on the things you're delivering to your client, being your front end. So it's kind of interesting, like data types, what you want to give to your JavaScript in there. if you're talking about an API project or something like that. That's one of the things that made me start to use a lot of GraphQL and try to evangelize it a bit. Although it's not really a nice API for doing like between systems stuff, so you can use like gRPC or even REST or other stuff which are more contained, more structured. But like if you have a front end, you can see so many advantages of doing this kind of languages strictly typed to Scala level, and then just have fun with it. Also, another thing that I do like is like not programming per se, but like use a lot of Linux, because you start understanding what's happening on some calls within your PHP stuff or any other language. So you kind of see what's happening beneath the hood. And then just try, for instance, to run Composer using strace in front of it. Like, yeah, just see what's happening, you know? Like, it's good to know what's running behind. And then you're going to see, oh, that's why it happens like that. So it's cool.
Cool. Thank you for your opinions. I think we have time for maybe a last question.
Yeah, if I may. So I have heard today the thought about death of RAM, and due to doctrine is not being upgraded much for the last period, I'd like to hear from you guys some alternatives or future of doctrine, specifically from you, Marco. Yeah.
Yes, what are the alternatives? I'm honestly, the ORM doctrine specifically is not a perfect tool. Everything from perfect, it has a lot of problems. It uses this concept of a unit of work, which is broken by default, because you have this shared mutable global state somewhere, and then you just say, you know, like, put it to the database, into the database, and it will do some stuff, and it will be super slow, eat all your memory, but it will get the job done. And the alternatives are quite terrible, honestly. Like, there is no proper alternative. So I've been pushing for multiple years that somebody comes up with something better. There is, yeah, Atlas, well. No, properly is not active at all. But we're talking about different patterns. We're talking about, we have a unit of work pattern, and then you have, you can have active record, and you can have, as far as you know, table data gateway, active query, which is Propel. But so far, the only one that really like works in the business scenarios that I've seen work so far has been the unit of work, which is flawed, but it is pretty much the one that gets the job done. Otherwise, I was talking about the death of ORM, because the other one that I see has nothing to do with relational databases, which is the event-sourced one. And I'm using it for all my new stuff, and I combine that with raw SQL, and I don't use the ORM with that. That's why the death of ORM, but it's not necessarily for everything. It's about finding a balance there, and so far there's nothing new on the front there.
Let's have another last question, and that's it.
Okay, hello. We talk today about middlewares and functional programming. I'm here. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I'm here. So, basically the question is, are the middleware flow compatible with solid principles? And what do you think are the solid principles useful now? Because, for example, when we have middleware interface which gets the requests and return the response, it just broke the Liskov substitution, because you cannot just change the another implementation of this interface. So also the logic and debugging this flow is more complex. How to work with it later when the system logic is grow to very complex?
Since I have the mic, let me start. So first of all, the solid principles are not dogmatic. They kind of are, but they are not. So if you see that you should break it, well, I think it's okay to kind of break it, but knowing what you're doing. And second is, you're right that having too many middlewares that are too small will make the configuration and the flow really complicated when it's built together. that's okay. Well, kind of okay. You can do it either in big middlewares or break it to small middlewares. So either you're getting the middlewares complicated or you're getting the overall structure complicated. You cannot get rid of all the complexity since that's what we are dealing with.
I think you're very much correct. It's about finding a balance. I mean, if you follow the single responsibility principle to an extent, that means that every function or every class should only contain one line of code. If you exaggerate a lot, and every package you build should only have one class in it. So obviously, you're going to find the proper balance there. Yeah, I think I'm done. Obviously, you're going to find a balance.
Another thing is that the Solid is pretty much a rebranding of cohesion and coupling, but accenting more on the decoupling, but forgetting about the cohesion. So that's, I think, the problem with Solid.
Yeah, and then there's the problem with the Liskov substitution principle. If you forget one element in the pipe, then everything is broken. This is a discussion we had before. There's currently no real way to enforce this with a type system that tells you, look, you forgot something. That's something we don't have in the PHP language. Could be added. It's just not trivial. It's not something you can do from one day to the other. It needs discussion and finding out things. But right now, the alternatives is what we generally do with listeners. If you look at Drupal, they have hooks. They're called hooks. That's the right name. We call it event manager. It's actually a hook manager. We have it in Doctrine. It makes persistence complicated. We have it in Symfony. It makes the MVC system complicated. We have it in Zen Framework. It makes it a mess also there. And you change a priority and everything breaks. It's just a number. You change the number somewhere. You have no way to figure out where it is. And you debug for 2 hours and then you figure out, oh, look, it's doing the authentication after the request is over. And this can happen. I think having an explicit pipeline is still a win on that. What we would need is making sure that we can improve the type system on that front, but it's something that I can't help you with. It's something that is for language researchers and type researchers and stuff like that. That's people at Microsoft can maybe respond to that. Not kidding. They can probably answer that.
I think I kind of disagree. You're saying, I mean, obviously if you're using the event dispatcher, if you change the priorities of your event listeners, you will break things. But the middleware doesn't really solve the problem. If you change the order of your middleware, it will still break things. Yes. It's just because it's more difficult to change the order of middlewares. Also, or maybe having the middlewares, you see that they're more explicit. So it might only be like, I would argue that you could still use your event dispatcher and have this explicit list of which event is executed first, etc.
Yes, but you look at the stack frames of an event dispatcher and it looks like completely flame graph. It's like frames and frames and frames and frames all the time. It's kind of difficult to follow what it is doing if you plug in a debugger as well. In general, the idea is making it explicit first. And then if you could, like if you saw my examples, I'm getting this request and I'm getting something from it by string. This is very dangerous, of course, and if you forget about it, you will get a crash. This particular thing that I'm doing there is something that is currently unsolved, and it needs answers, and it's not going to happen from one day to another.
Okay, guys, let's continue this discussion on lunch. So it's time for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.